Russia has launched a satellite believed by U.S. intelligence officials to be capable of inspecting and attacking other satellites. The U.S. Space Command reported this week that this Russian spacecraft is currently trailing a U.S. spy satellite in orbit. A spokesman for U.S. Space Command told Reuters, "We have observed nominal activity and assess it is likely a counter-space weapon, presumably capable of attacking other satellites in low Earth orbit." Well, the Kremlin has acknowledged the launch, but has been tight-lipped, that's not like them, about what it launched, with Russia's state space agency only saying that it was done in the interests of the defense ministry of the Russian Federation, and I'm sure for good of the overall global community as well. Joining me now for a more in-depth look at the recent launch and what he calls a potential Russian space Pearl Harbor is Brandon Weichert. He's a national security analyst at the National Interest and the author of a great book, Winning Space: How America Remains a Superpower. Brandon, thank you very much for taking the time. Look, I know you're a busy man, but we got a lot to talk about here.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Listen, let's start with the counter space weapon. What do you know about it? What can you reveal to us?
Yeah, so back in the day, they used to call this Istrebitel Sputnikov in Russian. This is an old concept. Basically, it's a small, highly maneuverable satellite that can, as you noted, trail behind or tailgate our sensitive satellite systems and either tap into them or physically push them out of their orbit. And that would basically render those systems useless. And it actually, because they can push them out of orbit, ground controllers for those satellites might not realize that actually they're under attack. They might think that the system was just down. And so that creates a window of opportunity on Earth for Russian or allied to Russian military to exploit.
Okay, now I think people will hear this, right? And their first thought was, oh my God, they're weaponizing space. But it seems like that's already happened, right? The horse has already left the barn.
Yeah, so in my book, I outline everybody's already militarized space. But now, yes, we, for the last 20 years or so, have been weaponizing space, not just the Americans, but the Russians and the Chinese. In fact, I argue in the book that in space weaponization, because of these dual-use systems that China and Russia are both deploying, they're actually ahead of the Americans in space weaponization, specifically with these counter-space weapons. And what that means is counter-space is a specific term. It basically means the ability for a country like Russia or China to deny access to space for another country. So Russia can deny America access to its space assets, which are critical for our national military as well as for our national economy.
Okay, for those of us, who are rocket scientists, right, like you and me, we understand the significance of this. But for folks out there who don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, I just called myself a rocket scientist, Brandon. Explain why this would be critical in, say the next massive global conflict. If we're behind Russia, if we're behind China, why is that important?
Well, because our military is the most dependent on satellites than any other military in the world. That may change over the next decade with Russia and China becoming more dependent, but right now we're more dependent. And what that means is those satellites are very vulnerable to attack and disruption. Our military operates what's known as over the horizon. We're an expeditionary force. Thankfully, we don't fight in our own country or near our own country. We go overseas to Eurasia. And so we need those satellites to help move us around, position us, coordinate attacks, and also to kind of get an idea of what the enemy is preparing with those surveillance satellites. The Chinese and the Russians are developing systems that can completely negate those satellite capabilities, which means they can render the U.S. military deaf, dumb, and blind, and therefore combat ineffective.
Right, taking out communications too, obviously. Now, if that happens, right, that also impacts the civilian community. And just to bring this home for all the younger viewers, you might lose TikTok.
Yeah. Correct. Yes, it'll knock everything out. And then you're also going to be probably, if China or Russia goes full bore, They would also pair this with a cyber attack, and we're already seeing that with China's Volt Typhoon. We saw that in 2020 with the SolarWinds hack that Russia was supposedly behind. So you're going to have a kind of a comprehensive attack on our satellite networks plus our cyber networks, which will be designed to render the whole country deaf, dumb, and blind, giving a window of opportunity for either Russia and or China to exploit closer to their shores.
Okay, shifting gears just a little bit. All right, still talking about the end of the world, though, because it's such a cheery topic. In the old days, the Cold War and everything was the ballistic missile issue, right? And so, a national defense was built around that, right? And those are very predictable flights and routes, and so we felt as if we were secure with our air defense systems to some degree. Talk to me, if you can, about sort of the next iteration of what that could look like, not necessarily just from space, but I'm getting us towards hypersonic weapons and aircraft.
Yeah. Well, as my colleagues at the Western Air Defense Sector and Eastern Air Defense Sector know, we don't have any viable defense against hypersonic weapons attack. There's no active defense right now. We are developing defenses, space-based defenses especially, but we're years away from that. We're really behind the curve when it comes to hypersonic, specifically defending against those hypersonic attacks. But also, our hypersonic weapons program is actually behind China's and Russia's. Russia has fielded their own hypersonic cruise missile. They're deploying their own longer-range hypersonic weapons as well. China 2 years ago tested the world's fastest hypersonic glide vehicle in the Gobi Desert, got within 20 miles of its intended target. That's pretty impressive considering this is radical new technology. So we don't have a defense against that, and basically our whole air defense network for the country is rendered obsolete by hypersonic weapons attacks.